I have kept a great many of my brother's secrets, and most of them I would keep again without complaint, but only one of them I would keep gladly and gratefully, and for 100 winters if 100 winters were asked of me, and it began the night he told me he meant to buy himself a bride. We were in the long library at Ellersby Court, the last night of November, the fire burned down to a single red eye, and the candles guttering low. Snow ticked against the black glass the way it does when the wind is only thinking about becoming a storm. Alaric stood with his back to me, and his hands clasped behind him, which was how he stood when he had decided a thing and did not wish to be argued out of it, and I knew before he spoke a word that I was about to hear something I would not like. "I am going to engage a woman," he said without turning, "to be my betrothed, for the season, through 12th night, and then I am going to send her home with enough money that she need never think of me again." I set down my glass with more care than the moment required, because I was buying myself a breath. "Engage," I said, "as one engages a footman." "As one engages a footman." "Alaric," I stood, because it seemed a thing that ought to be said standing, "you cannot rent a fiancée." "I can rent anything." He turned then, and the dying fire found the hard line of his jaw and made nothing softer of it. He was the Duke of Ellersby, 36 old, and men called him the Stone Duke, and the name was fair and he had earned it. I had watched grown lords lose the thread of their own sentences when he turned his gray eyes upon them across a dinner table. I had watched him bury our father in the churchyard on the hill, and never once let his face so much as move. "Sit down, Theo, and stop looking at me as though I had proposed to marry a horse. I am proposing precisely the opposite. I am proposing to marry no one at all, and to make certain the whole of England believes I have." I did not sit. "Explain it to me then, this arrangement of yours, slowly, as you would to a footman." Something that was almost a smile crossed his mouth and did not stay. "You have seen the state of this house since October. Ambrose has spent the autumn going about every drawing-room from here to York, telling anyone who will pour him wine that I will die unmarried, and the title will fall to him. He has said it so often, and with such an air of Christian sorrow, that the mothers of 3 counties have taken it for a gauntlet thrown down. I have had 4 separate proposals of match brought to me by post in a single month, Theo, 4 each from some family that has decided its plainest daughter would look well as a duchess, and that a grieving man might be caught if he is cornered gently. Lady Roswell has installed herself, and that unfortunate child of hers under my roof, for a fortnight of Christmas revels that I did not want and did not invite, and she does not mean to leave without an understanding. I cannot turn her out. Her husband holds a mortgage. I should prefer he did not call in this winter, so she is here, and where Lady Roswell is, the rest will come, sniffing at Christmas. "And a betrothed," I said, beginning to see it, and not liking that I was beginning to see it, "ends the hunt." "A betrothed ends the hunt." He came away from the window at last and stood by the fire, and the light went up his tall figure and threw his shadow enormous on the shelves of books our grandfather had bought and no one had read. A settled, evident, undeniable betrothed. Ambrose's rumor dies the day I present her. The mothers take their daughters home. Lady Roswell packs her trunks. And I am left for one winter in peace, the only thing I have ever wanted and the one thing this house will not grant me while I am thought to be available. He looked into the fire. "And in the spring, my false bride and I discover with every appearance of regret that we do not suit. She vanishes. I put a small paragraph in the newspapers, and I am left alone again, which is where I am content to be." It was a cold, clean, entirely mad plan, and it was so exactly like him that I very nearly laughed aloud. But I did not laugh, because I had been 19 years old the last winter, and I remembered it. "And when you must marry in earnest," I asked gently, for I meant it gently, "when there truly must be an heir, and the title truly must go somewhere other than Ambrose, then I shall do it as I do everything." He said it lightly, and it was the lightness that I could not bear, how easy, how practiced he had made the saying of it, without hope and correctly, There is a difference, Theo, between wanting a thing and requiring it. I shall require an heir one day. I shall arrange one, as I arrange the drainage of the low meadows because the estate demands it. I do not deceive myself that I shall want the woman or she me. That door is shut." He said it without self-pity, which was worse than if he had wept. This winter is only a stratagem to keep it shut a little longer. I understood him then, and understanding him was the thing that undid all my objections, because it turned out they were not objections to his madness. They were grief for it. I remembered the other winter. I had been 19 and he 4–20, our father not 2 years dead, and Miss Sabine Averill had worn my brother's ring through a whole glittering season and let the world believe she loved him. She had been beautiful in the way that makes a room rearrange itself, and clever and warm. Oh, she had been warm. I remembered her warmth, the way she would touch his sleeve and look up at him and make him, my stone-faced brother, color like a boy. And she had left him for the Marquis of Cravenhoe on the very eve of the banns, because Cravenhoe's fortune was the larger, and she had told her particular friends afterward. These things always find their way home, always, that she had never once in all those months been able to warm her hands at Alaric Cade, that there had been nothing under the coldness to warm them at. She had been wrong about that. I knew because I was his brother and I had watched him. He had loved her the way a locked house holds its heat, entirely and where not a soul could see. And when she went he did not rage, and he did not drink, and he did not do any of the ordinary human things a man might do. He simply began quietly to close the doors. The ballroom first, which we did not open again for 11 years. Then the habit of dining out. Then the habit of hopping. Door after door, until there was nothing left open in the whole great house of him but the study and the account books and the tenants' welfare. And my brother, whom I had loved above every living creature, became a man who was faultlessly kind to his people and made of granite to everyone else, and managed things instead of feeling them. So when he told me he meant to hire a woman to counterfeit the very thing that had ruined him, I understood at last that it was not madness at all. It was the most rational act of self-defense a wounded man ever devised. If the love was false from the very first, bought, contracted, dated to end at 12th night, then it could not be taken from him because it had never been given. He had found a way to be betrothed and to be safe at the same time. He would let the whole world believe a woman loved him, and he alone would know it was a lie, and in the knowing he would be armored against ever being fooled again. I sat down at last, and I poured us both more wine, and I gave up. "Where," I said, "does one find such a woman?" "You find her." He said it as though it were the most reasonable request in the world to make of a younger brother on a winter's night. "You have the gift for people that I lost, or perhaps never had. Find me someone poor enough to need the money, and proud enough to keep the secret, and honest enough that she will not turn it against me the moment she has her hands on it. Not a schemer, Theo. I will not have a schemer under this roof. I have had a schemer under this roof, and I have spent 11 years recovering from her. Someone with nothing to gain but the fee, and the good sense to take it and go quietly when the winter is done." "You are describing a saint," I said, "and asking her to lie." "I am describing a woman in difficulty," he said, "and offering her a way out of it. There is a difference. Find her." I found her 3 days later, entirely by accident, which is the only way I have ever in my life found anything that turned out to matter. It came about through the torn hem of a ball gown. Lady Roswell's daughter, a shy, over-managed girl of 15 named Cecilia, who I do not think wished to be a duchess any more than I wished her to be one, had caught 6 inches of Valenciennes lace on the leg of a card table and torn it clean, and had wept over it as though the house were burning down around her, because her mother had told her the gown was for the Christmas assembly and there would be no other. And Mrs. Pardew, our housekeeper, a woman of great sense, had sent to the village for the young person who took in fine sewing, because there was no one at Ellersby with hands delicate enough to mend Valenciennes, so that the mend could not be found. I was crossing the small east parlor on my way to nowhere in particular when the young person was shown in, and I stopped in the doorway, because she did a thing in the first half-minute that I had never once seen done in that house. She looked at the ruined gown in the girl's hands, and then she looked, not at the gown, but at the girl, at the swollen, tear-streaked, frightened face of the child who had torn it, and she said, quite simply and with a plain kindness that had no performance in it at all, "It is not ruined, miss. Truly it is not. I can make it so that you will never find the place again yourself, not if you look for an hour." And the crying stopped. It did not stop because the child had been ordered to stop, or shamed into stopping, or distracted out of it. It stopped because she had been believed by someone who plainly meant what she said, and there is nothing on earth so steadying to a frightened person as being told the truth by someone who is not afraid. Her name was Verity Sunderland. She was 22, though what makes a face older, and hers had the fine, drawn, carefully managed look of a person who has learned to be sparing with bread. Her gown was clean and turned and mended so cunningly that you had to know cloth, as I happened to see that it had been mended at all, the cuffs faced, the hem let down and the old line pressed out, the whole of it kept with a discipline that spoke of a woman who had decided that poverty need not mean disorder. She took the wrecked lace into her lap by the window for the light, and her needle went into it and out of it in small, even movements, and she did not once lift her eyes to look about the great room, or up at the gilded ceiling, or at the enormous portrait of the third Duke over the mantel, as though none of it had anything whatever to say to her. I have known duchesses in my life who could not enter a room without measuring it against themselves. This girl entered a duke's parlor and set to work, and did not seem to feel that the room required anything of her at all. I did a thing I do not commonly do with a tradeswoman. I sat down across from her, which visibly surprised her, and I asked her questions, which surprised her a great deal more. And by the small mercies of a warm fire and an idle winter afternoon, and I think, a face she had decided she could trust, I learned the shape of her life. Her father had been a clergyman, a good scholar and a poor manager, a man with far more Greek than sense, who had died 3 years since and left 2 daughters and a melancholy little heap of debts. The elder daughter, my sewing woman, kept them both with her needle, fine work, mending, the making over of gowns for ladies who would not have received her at their tables. The younger, Nell, was 15, and had a weakness of the lungs that the damp of their village did nothing to mend, and a physician in York, she named him, a Mr. Hartley of Petergate, had told her, without any great gentleness, that the girl wanted dry air and warm rooms and rest and freedom from labor, all of which cost money that a needle could not earn. She told me none of it to move me. That is the thing I have never forgotten. She told it plainly, in flat answer to plain questions, in the manner of a person who has decided that lying, even the small pretty lies of the drawing-room, is a luxury she can no longer afford. And when she heard herself, and understood that she had said a great deal more than a tradeswoman ought to say to a duke's brother, she pressed her lips together and bent lower over the lace, and the color came up her neck in a slow tide, and she said low, "I beg your pardon, sir. You did not ask to hear my history." "I did, though," I said. "I asked you 3 questions, and you did me the courtesy of answering them truthfully, which is rarer in this house than you would credit." And I watched her over the top of my own thoughts, and I felt the whole shape of the thing arrive in me at once, the way disaster and salvation so often arrive wearing each other's coats. Here she is. Here is the woman he described, poor enough, proud enough. And oh, God help the both of us, honest to the marrow of her, and about to be handed to my brother to be taught to lie. I should have got up and walked away. I told myself so for 3 whole days. I turned it over on my morning rides until the horse grew bored of me. She was too good for it, was the plain truth, too honest to be spent on a deception, however kindly meant. To take a woman whose one remaining possession was her truthfulness, and to pay her to counterfeit an engagement, seemed to me a species of theft worse than any Ambrose had ever contemplated. And then I would think of Nell, 15 years old, coughing in a rented room in the York damp, wanting only warm air and rest that her sister could not buy. And I would think of Alaric going down alone into that shut study for the whole long remainder of his life, managing the drainage of the low meadows and requiring an heir without hope. And on the third day I gave up my scruples, as we generally do when both mercy and self-interest point the same way, and I told my brother I had found her. He received her in the library, of course, because he received everything of importance in the library, arranged behind the great desk like a magistrate about to hear a case. He had lit more candles than he needed, so that the room was bright and formal, and he had put on the flat, closed, dealing with the world voice that I had come to hate. He named a sum of money, I heard it, and it was a great deal, more than a needle could earn in 15 years, and I watched her go very still when she heard it, the way a person goes still who is holding herself hard against hope. "You will understand the terms," Alaric said, in that voice of dry commerce. "You will come to Ellersby as my betrothed. You will be presented to the county over the Christmas season and through Twelfth Night. You will conduct yourself so as to leave no doubt of our understanding. And in the spring we will discover publicly that we do not suit. You will withdraw. The fee will be paid to you in full, whether the scheme succeeds or fails, on the single condition that you never, to any living soul, reveal that it was other than genuine. Is that understood?" "It is understood, Your Grace," she said. "Have you any questions?" And she lifted her eyes to him, the first time, I think, that she had truly looked at him, and she asked the thing that I am persuaded, looking back across all the years, decided everything, though not one of the three of us in that bright room knew it then. "You wish me," she said slowly, "to make everyone in this house believe that I love you, and believe that you love me." "I wish you," Alaric corrected, "to make everyone in this house believe we are to be married. Love is neither here nor there. Only the appearance of a settled understanding is required." "For those people," Verity said, "the appearance and the thing are not two different things. If I am cold to you, they will say you have made a poor bargain and pity you, and the scheme will fail. If I am warm to you, warm enough to be believed, then I will be lying to their faces, every hour of every day, for 2 months together, and taking your money to do it." She looked down at her folded hands. "I have never in my life, Your Grace, allowed a person to believe a thing of me that was not true. My father used to say it was the only property we had left in the world, and that we ought to be careful of it, being so poor in all the rest." I saw my brother's jaw tighten, and I thought I understood why. I believe he expected her in that moment to refuse, and I believe that some small ruined corner of him, the corner Sabine had made, actually wanted her to refuse, so that he might be proved right one final time that no honest woman would come within arm's reach of him. It would have hurt him, and it would also have comforted him, in the terrible way that being proved right about the worst can comfort a wounded person. "Then," he said, and his voice went flat as slate, "we have nothing further to discuss." I did not say that. She lifted her chin, and there was not one grain of defiance in the gesture, only a dreadful, level practicality, which was far more moving than defiance would have been. "I said that I have never lied. I did not say that I would not. My sister is 15 years old. The physician says she wants dry rooms and warm air and rest, and I cannot give her any of the three with a needle, not if I sew until my eyes fail. You are offering me all three, for the price of a winter's performance. So I will do the thing my father would have grieved to see me do, Your Grace, and I will do it thoroughly, and I will do it well, because it will buy my sister a spring that she may not, otherwise, live to see." She drew a breath, and here her voice did not shake, which was somehow the most affecting thing of all. "But I will not counterfeit to you. To all the world in your drawing-rooms, yes, I will lie with a smile and never falter. But between us two, in the hours when there is no one to deceive, let there be none of it. Let there be one person in this whole great house whom I am not deceiving, and one person in it who is not deceiving me. I think I can carry the entire winter if I am allowed that. I do not think I could carry it otherwise." The fire settled in the grate. A log broke and sent up a small, quiet fountain of sparks. My brother, the stone Duke of Ellersby, who had not been genuinely surprised by another human being in some 11 years, looked across his bright formal library at this poor young woman who had just agreed to sell him the one possession she valued, expressly in order to preserve it, and I watched something move behind his gray eyes that I had believed dead and buried in the same churchyard as our father. "Agreed," he said, and his voice was not perfectly steady, and he knew it was not, and he covered the fault by turning sharply to the window as though something in the snowy dark had caught his attention. And so it began, the great deception of Ellersby Court, which the whole county remembers to this day as the winter the stone Duke thawed, and which only 3 living souls ever knew to be a fraud from the first. And of those 3, one was to forget it altogether, to forget that it had ever been anything but the truest thing in his life, before the year had turned. They were, I must own, magnificent at it. Verity Sunderland came down to dinner on her first night at Ellersby, in a gown that Mrs. Pardew had found in a press of my late mother's things, and that she herself had sat up half the night making over, and she wore it the way that only a woman who truly understands cloth can wear a made-over gown, so that it looked entirely like a choice, and not at all like a necessity. She came into the great dining-room quietly, and then, without any effort that the eye could catch, she held the whole long candle-lit room because she looked at people. Actually looked at them and listened to what they said and remembered it, and there is nothing in all the world so rare in a great house as a person who genuinely attends to you, so that it passes, easily, for a kind of enchantment. Lady Roswell's face, when Alaric rose and said, in a voice pitched to reach the foot of the table, "Lady Roswell, permit me to present Miss Sunderland, to whom I have lately had the very great honor to become engaged." Lady Roswell's face in that moment is a small treasure I have carried down all the years since and taken out to admire on dull evenings. She had come to Ellersby to leave with an understanding for her daughter, and she saw all her Christmas campaigning collapse in a single sentence, and she was far too well-bred to show it, and not nearly well-bred enough to hide it, so that her congratulations came out through a mouth that had gone quite square. Poor Cecilia, I will say, looked frankly relieved, and by the second course was talking to Verity about lace with an animation her mother had certainly never permitted her to show a duke. But it was my cousin Ambrose whom I watched. Ambrose Cade was our father's brother's son, and would be Duke of Ellersby if Alaric died without a son of his own, and he had spent the better part of a decade arranging all his hopes and habits around my brother's grief, the way a man will build his cottage against the wall of a great house he expects one day to inherit. He was not a stupid man. That was the trouble with Ambrose. A stupid man would have been no danger. He was clever and patient and perfectly pleasant, and he had waited 11 years with the settled confidence of a man who believes the future has already been promised to him in writing. When Alaric said the word engaged, I saw Ambrose's wineglass stop, quite still, halfway to his mouth, and I saw him set it down again, untasted, with great care, and I saw him turn his eyes upon Verity Sunderland and begin, from that very first evening, before the soup was cold, to study her. Not the way a man studies a pretty woman, the way a solicitor studies a document he suspects of being forged. There I thought, my pleasure in Lady Roswell's face going suddenly cold, there is the whole danger of this winter, sitting 4 places down and smiling. The performance settled into the house, and settled into the county, more smoothly and far more completely than any of us had dared to hope. Before company, and after the news went out, there was a great deal of company, for the whole neighborhood contrived reasons to call and see with their own eyes the woman who had thawed the stone Duke. Before company, Alaric and Verity were, precisely and exactly, an engaged couple of the very best sort, attentive without any vulgar display of it, easy with one another without the least familiarity. He would touch her hand where it lay upon the table briefly, as a man does who has the right, and she would permit it as a woman does who welcomes the right, and it was flawlessly done. Once at a card party got up by the Fenwicks at Marholm, I watched from across the room as he said something low to her, and she laughed a real laugh, bright and surprised, and turned her whole face up to his. And the picture of the two of them was so warm and so entire that I, who had helped to build the fraud stone by stone, felt my own chest tighten with the beauty of it, and had to remind myself deliberately, like a man reciting a lesson, that it was false, that I had made it false, that it was a thing constructed for the eyes of Lady Roswell and the drawing-rooms of the county, and would be taken down again in the spring. But there were the other hours, and it was the other hours that none of us, least of all the two who lived them, had reckoned upon at all. There were the hours when Lady Roswell was not looking, when the callers had gone and the candles were lit against an early dark and there was no county to perform for. I did not think of it, in arranging the thing, that a deception requires an audience, and that a house in December with the snow shutting the roads is a house very often without one. There were long afternoons and longer evenings when the only three people at their ease in the great rooms were my brother, and his hired bride and myself, and I did not count, as they both very well knew. And in those hours the accounts went, quietly, unwatched, unpaid, and something else began in the empty rooms to grow. I came upon them one afternoon in the second week of December, in the music room, unannounced, because I had come to fetch a book and had forgotten they were there. There was no company. There was no one to perform for. The snow had shut the Ellersby road entirely 2 days before, and the whole world had narrowed to the warm rooms and the white silence beyond the glass. And the two of them were simply talking. She sat at the pianoforte, though she was not playing. Her hands rested still upon the keys, not pressing them. He stood a wholly proper 6 feet off by the window with his arms folded. And they did not stop when I came in. That was the thing that stopped me in the doorway, with the cold understanding going through me like water. They did not break apart, or change their faces, or resume the performance, because there was no performance running. They had forgotten to keep the accounts. They had forgotten that there was a fee and a term, and a spring in which it would all be dissolved. She was telling him something about her father, about the poor scholar parson and his Greek and his hopeless management of money, told with a kind of exasperated love that only the truly bereaved can manage, and my brother was listening, not waiting for her to finish so that he might manage the conversation onward, not arranging his reply. Listening with his whole grave attention, the way I had not seen him listen to a living soul since before Sabine Averill taught him that attention was dangerous. And when she came to the end of her little story, he said something low that I did not catch, and it made her look down at the keys and smile, not the performing smile she wore in company, but a smaller, private, real one, that she seemed almost to be smiling to herself rather than to him. And neither of them, in that moment, was pretending anything whatsoever, because there was no one in the room to pretend for. Except me, and I did not count, and they both knew it, and neither of them so much as glanced at me, and I took my book and I went out very quietly, and I stood a while in the cold corridor with my heart going hard. Because I understood, standing there, what had happened and what was going to happen, and I could not for the life of me see how it could end in anything but grief. She had told him on the very first night in the bright formal library that between the two of them there would be no counterfeiting, and she had kept that vow with a terrible, scrupulous exactness. In company she lied to the whole world with a warm and perfect smile, but alone with him in the music room, at the chessboard, on the sheltered walk under the yews when the snow held off, alone with him she told him only, ever, and exactly the truth. That was her bargain with herself, the price at which she had agreed to sell her honesty, that she would keep one corner of the house honest, one person undeceived, so that she might bear the deceiving of all the rest. And the truth that she told him, in those unwatched hours, day by patient day, was that she liked him, that she saw and was not repelled by the ache that lived under all his granite, that she found the man whom our father's death and Sabine Averill's leaving had walled up alive inside the Duke, and that she did not flinch from him, and did not fear him, and did not, this above all, want anything from him but the winter's fee that she had honestly agreed to earn. She had promised him her honesty as a strange, dry, unlooked-for sort of kindness, a lit corner in a dark house, where he need not, for once, wonder whether he was being played. And the honesty, as the short days went by, became the plain and unconcealable fact that she was, quietly and without the smallest design, coming to love him. And he, my brother, who had built the entire scheme with the express and single purpose that the love should be false, and therefore should be safe, and therefore should never be able to be taken from him. He was standing, unknowing, in the one room in his whole clever design where the love had turned real under his feet. I tried once to warn him. It went as badly as such things always go. We had ridden out to the home farm on a hard, bright morning when the snow had crusted enough to bear the horses, to see about a fallen buyer, and we were coming back across the white home paddock with the sun on the drifts and the breath standing in clouds about the horses' heads. And I said, because it seemed a thing that must be said if I was ever to say it, "You are fond of her." Alaric did not so much as turn his head. She is a well-conducted young woman doing a difficult thing competently and with discretion, he said. I am not fond of her. I am satisfied with her work. Alaric, it is an arrangement, Theodore. He used my full name, which was the door he closed when he wished a conversation to end, and I heard it close. You above all people know that it is an arrangement since you arranged it. In March she will take her fee and her sister and remove to somewhere with dry air and good rooms, and I will put a paragraph in the papers regretting that we did not in the end suit, and she will be heartily glad to be quit of a cold and difficult man, and I will be glad, Theo, to have my house to myself again. That is the shape of the thing. It has always been the shape of the thing. I will thank you not to go making it into another shape inside your head, merely because you are a sentimental fellow, and it is the depth of winter, and there is nothing to do but imagine romances. And the hours in the music room, I said, keeping my eyes on the white line of the wall ahead of us, because I did not think I could say it to his face, when there is no one to perform for. He was silent so long that I believed he did not mean to answer me at all. The horses' hooves crunched in the crust. The cold sun lay along the drifts. She keeps her word, he said at last, and there was something in his voice, low and careful, that I had not heard in it in 11 years, something that had used to be there before, when we were young and our father was alive and Sabine had not yet come. She told me that first night that she would not lie to me, and she does not. She lies to the whole of your county without a tremor, and she has never once lied to me. He looked straight ahead at the white road home. Do you know what that is, Theo? After Sabine, do you know what it is to have one single person left in the whole world who has given you her word that she will not deceive you, and who keeps it hour after hour when it would be so easy and so much kinder to deceive? He drew a breath of the cold air. I know exactly what it is worth, to the shilling, because I paid for it. That is the whole beauty of the thing and the whole safety of it. I have not stumbled into some accident of the heart, some genuine feeling that could be taken from me. I have purchased an honest companion for a single winter, at a fair price, honestly rendered. I made the other error once. I believed a warmth was real that had been arranged for my benefit, and it very nearly finished me. I do not intend to make it a second time. I will enjoy her honesty for the winter I have bought it, and in the spring I will let it go. And I will not be such a fool as to mistake a thing I have rented for a thing I have been given. And there it was, the whole tragedy of my brother, laid out plain in a single winter paddock. He had loved a woman who lied, and it had all but destroyed him. Now, by a mercy he had never asked for and could not recognize, he had been sent a woman who told him nothing but truth, and he had, with terrible cleverness, so arranged the circumstances beforehand that he was unable to believe the truth when he received it, because he had bought it. Because her honesty was, in his mind, a part of the performance he was paying for, a service contracted and rendered. He could not permit himself even to imagine that she meant it, that it came from her and not from the fee, because to imagine that would be to open one of the doors he had bricked up, and he had bricked them up precisely so that he need never again stand in a doorway hopping. And she, keeping her strange vow with that scrupulous exactness, she would never break out of her role in company to declare that she meant it. And she would never, in the honest quiet hours, presume to say a thing that might sound, even faintly, like a poor woman angling after the greatest fortune in 3 counties. Because angling was the very sin my brother most despised, and she had understood that about him, and she would sooner have cut out her own tongue than have him look at her, even for an instant, the way he must once have looked at Sabine Averill. So they went on, each of them by December's end, wholly and hopelessly in love, each of them entirely certain that the other was performing, and each of them too honorable in exactly and precisely opposite ways to say a single word of it. And all the while, 4 places down the table and out along the frozen lanes to the villages, my cousin Ambrose watched and waited and dug. He was not a fool, as I have said, and he had a decade's motive and a solicitor's endless patience, and he went about his work in the only way that could not be answered quietly and correctly and out of our sight. He remarked, aloud and pleasantly at more than one dinner, that it was odd no one in the county had heard the name Sunderland before, given that Miss Sunderland was so evidently a gentlewoman. He remarked that her gowns, though she wore them beautifully, had a he was too well bred to finish the sentence, and left it, poisonously hanging. He observed, for he observed everything, that she was gentle with the servants in the particular way of a person who has herself been in service, or near it, that she thanked the footmen, and knew the housemaids' names, and once, forgetting herself, had stooped to help a young maid gather up a dropped tray before the girl could be scolded for it. Little things. Each of them nothing, all of them, gathered by a patient hand, something. And somewhere in the short dark days between Christmas and the turning of the year, my cousin sent a man of his acquaintance, a quiet, incurious, well-paid man, to a certain village, to ask a few careful questions in the tap-room of the inn. And the man came back, in the first days of January, and reported. And Ambrose learned everything. He learned that the Duke of Ellersby's betrothed was the elder daughter of a dead and penniless curate, that she had kept herself and a sickly younger sister by taking in fine sewing and the making over of ladies' gowns, that the younger girl was consumptive, or near it, and wanted care the elder could not afford, and that the elder had left the parish quite suddenly at the very beginning of the winter, telling her few neighbors only that she had been fortunate enough to find good employment at a great distance. He learned, in short, the whole truth, or enough of it to destroy her with. He did not learn that it was a paid arrangement. That particular secret my brother had kept even from his own steward, and it never came out at all. But he did not need that peace. The peace he had was quite sufficient. A duke's affianced bride, who was in fact a hired needlewoman, a curate's daughter, passed off as a gentlewoman fit to be a duchess. That was scandal enough to break an engagement, ruin a poor woman past all mending, and clear my cousin's road to the succession. He did not need to know it was false to make it fatal. He only needed to make it public. And here, I have thought about this a great deal in the years since, and I have never decided whether it was the cleverest or the cruelest thing my cousin ever did, and I incline now to think it was both. Here, Ambrose did not use his knowledge at once. He did not go quietly to my brother and let it be quietly settled, the false betrothed sent away in the night, and the whole thing hushed up before the county could feed on it. That would have got him what he claimed to want and spared everyone the worst of the pain, and Ambrose did not want it settled quietly. He wanted it seen. He held his knowledge close, like a card kept back from the trick, all through the first week of January, and he waited patiently, pleasantly, dining every night at the same table as his victim, and smiling at her across the candles. He waited for the largest possible table at which to lay it down. The largest table in the county, that winter, was the 12th night masquerade at Ellersby Court. It was the oldest of the house's customs, older than my brother, older than our father, a masked revel on the last night of the Christmas season, to which the whole of the county came, and which had not been held at Ellersby since the winter Sabine left, 11 years before, when Alaric had shut the ballroom and let the custom die with all the rest. And that year because he was betrothed, or thought to be, because the whole county believed the stone duke had thawed and half of it wished to see the miracle with its own eyes, because Verity, I think, in one of the honest quiet hours, had said to him wistfully that she had heard of the great Ellersby masquerades from her father and had always wondered what such a thing could be like. That year, my brother opened the ballroom. He opened the ballroom. 11 years shut, and he opened it, and had it cleaned and candled and dressed with holly and ivy and 1,000 lights, for a woman he was paying to leave him in the spring. He told me it was for the county, and to put the final seal on the engagement, and to end Ambrose's rumors once and for all in the most public manner possible. He said all of that to me, standing in the half-lit ballroom on the morning of the 5th of January, while the servants hung the greenery, and I let him say it, and I did not tell him that a man does not open the room where his heart was broken for the sake of ending a rumor. He does it for one reason only, whether he will admit the reason to his own brother or not. I remember that last night of the season, as though it were painted on the inside of my eyes. The great ballroom of Ellersby thrown open after 11 years of darkness, blazing with candles from end to end, the beams hung with holly and the mantels banked with ivy and white winter roses forced in the succession house. The whole of the county come in silk and velvet and masks, 400 people and more, murmuring under the lights, because it had gone about the country that the stone duke was betrothed, and half of them could not credit it, and every one of them had contrived to be there to see. I remember the heat of so many candles, and the ring of 100 conversations up under the old dark beams, and the musicians tuning in the gallery. And I remember Verity coming down the great stair into the light. She wore a gown of dove-gray silk shot with silver. She had made it herself, of course. She had made every stitch she wore that whole winter, and this, her masterwork, she had made in secret over the long nights of the season, and it caught the candlelight and moved with it, gray to silver to gray, like snow in the last of a winter sunset. Her mask was a plain silver domino, no feathers, no paste jewels, nothing to shout. She never needed to shout, and her hair was dressed simply, with a few of those curls escaping at the temple that never would consent to be pinned. She came down the great stair alone, into that blazing crowded room, and the murmuring dropped as she came, the way a field of grass will still when the wind drops, 400 masked faces turning up to watch a curate's daughter descend the Ellersby stair as though she had been born to it. And at the foot of the stair stood my brother in black, his own mask pushed carelessly up onto his hair as though he had forgotten it was there, watching her come down. I have said already that no man alive could counterfeit the look that was on Sabine Averil's face when she used to gaze up at my brother, because I had believed once that it was real. I will tell you now the thing that the masquerade taught me, and that I have carried ever since, that there is, in fact, a look that cannot be counterfeited, and that it is not the look of the beloved but the look of the one who loves. It was on my brother's face as Verity came down the stair, plain for the whole county to read, and it had no performance in it anywhere, because he had forgotten, entirely and at last, that there was ever anything to perform. Whatever he had told me in the cold paddock about rented honesty and bricked-up doors, it was gone. It had gone somewhere in the unwatched hours in the music-room, at the chessboard, on the walk under the yews, and it was not coming back, and his whole undefended heart was in his face for 400 masked strangers to see, and he did not know it, and I could not save him from it, and I would not have if I could. They danced, of course they danced. The musicians struck up, and my brother led his hired bride out into the middle of the blazing floor, and the county drew back to watch the stone duke dance for the first time in 11 years, and dance he did, not well, he had never danced well. He was too stiff and too proud in the shoulders, but he danced with his whole grave attention fixed on her face, and she laughed up at him, and it was the very last hour of the whole long performance, and I stood by the wall and watched. And I swear before God that neither of them was performing anything at all. Ambrose let them have that dance. I have never doubted that he did it on purpose. He was not a man without a sense of the stage, my cousin, and he let them have the dance so that the fall should come from a greater height. He struck as the music ended. The last chord died in the gallery, and the dancers stood a moment breathless in the center of the cleared floor with the whole county's masked eyes upon them. And into that hush, my cousin Ambrose stepped forward out of the crowd with his glass raised, and he had put off his own mask, so that his face should be seen and known, and he was smiling as though for a toast. "A word, cousin," he said, and he pitched it to carry the whole length of that great vaulted room, so that the last murmurs died and 400 people turned to hear what they took for a bridegroom's health being drunk. "Before we drink to your happiness, for we are all of us so very glad to see it, it is only that we should like to know, ought we not, the name of the family we are met tonight to honor, Miss Sunderland." He gave the name a small, precise, poisoned weight, the weight of a man setting down a winning card face up. You will forgive an old bachelor his curiosity. It is only that I have made some little inquiry, meaning nothing but kindness, and I confess myself puzzled. I can find no Sunderlands of any estate anywhere in the north. None. There is only one Sunderland I have been able to discover, a poor clergyman of a poor parish, dead these 3 years and buried in debt, who left behind him 2 daughters. 2 daughters. He turned slowly, taking in the whole hushed room, the very picture of wounded honesty. One of whom, I am reliably told, kept the pair of them by taking in plain sewing for hire, by mending other ladies' gowns, in point of fact, and the other of whom lies, even now, dying of a consumption in a hired room. For want of the money to be cared for properly, he let it sit. He let the whole terrible weight of it settle on the silent, gorgeous, masked crowd. I ask it as a cade, as one who loves this house and this name. I ask only whether Ellersby has the right to know whether it is being, this glittering night, deceived. The word fell into the silence of that great room like a stone dropped down a deep well, and I heard it strike the bottom, and I heard the whole county draw its breath. I have gone over the moment that followed 1,000 times, and I could paint it for you with my eyes shut. The blaze of the candles, the 400 frozen faces, half of them still masked, turned all one way, and in the cleared center of the floor my brother and Verity Sunderland, standing where the dance had left them, with the truth of her laid open before the entire county, the poor girl, the needle for hire, the dying sister, the curate's grave, the fraud of the gray and silver gown, and the borrowed name. I saw her understand in the space of a heartbeat that it was ended, that it had always, from the very first night in the bright library, been going to end, and that it was ending now not in the quiet privacy of an April paragraph in a newspaper, but here, in fire and silk, before the assembled county, in disgrace and in public, and past all mending. And I saw her do the thing that broke me where I stood. She did not weep, she did not run, she did not cast about for my brother's protection, or fling herself upon the mercy of the room, or say one word in her own defense. She reached up with a hand that I could see was perfectly steady, and she took off her silver mask. She took it off, so that they should at least look upon her true face while they judged her, and she stood there in the center of the blazing floor, a dead curate's daughter in a gown she had sewn with her own hands, among 400 silks and jewels, and she lifted her chin, and she waited to be turned out of the house. She had promised, that very first night, that between herself and my brother there would be no counterfeiting. And now, exposed and ruined before the whole world, she would not counterfeit even a defense, even an excuse, even a plea. She simply stood in the truth barefaced, as she had stood in it every honest hour of the whole long winter, and let it cost her the very last thing she had. And my brother, the stone Duke of Ellersby, who had conceived and built and paid for this entire winter's stratagem for the one sovereign purpose of making certain that he could never, ever again be found made a fool of before the world by a woman thought false, My brother looked at her standing there unmasked and undefended in the wreck of his own clever design. I have told you that no man could counterfeit the look on his face as she came down the stair. I will tell you now the last thing the masquerade taught me, the thing I have carried since like a live coal cupped in both hands, that a man who has been frozen through for 11 years does not thaw slowly, by degrees, as the almanac would have a season do. He thaws all at once, in a single terrible instant, like ice going off a roof in the first true sun. And it is a fearful and a beautiful thing to stand near when it happens. And it happened to my brother in the space of one indrawn breath, in front of the whole assembled county of his birth. He did not answer Ambrose. He did not so much as look at Ambrose. He turned his back upon our cousin, fully and deliberately, as though Ambrose had that instant ceased to exist. And Ambrose, I may as well tell you here, did rather cease to exist after that night. His one great card played and lost before 400 witnesses. He found the neighborhood grown suddenly and permanently cold to him, and he withdrew from the county before Candlemas, and we have troubled ourselves about him very little in all the years since. My brother turned his back on him, and he crossed the cleared floor to where Verity stood, in the ringing silence, unhurried, every eye in the room following him. And he took her hand, not as he had taken it all that winter for the benefit of the watching county, lightly, correctly, with the air of a man exercising a right, but the way a drowning man takes hold of the one thing in all the flood that will not let him go under. And he spoke, and he pitched his voice, as Ambrose had pitched his, to carry to the very back of that great room, so that not one soul in it could ever afterward pretend they had not heard him, so that it could never be unsaid. My cousin, said my brother, is mistaken in one particular only. He asks whether Ellersby is being deceived. His voice did not shake, though I, who knew every register of it, heard the whole of his broken and mending heart underneath the words. It is not. I know precisely who this woman is. Better, I think, than my cousin knows for all his inquiries. She is Verity Sunderland, the daughter of a poor and honest clergyman. She has kept her young sister alive through 3 hard years with the labor of her own 2 hands, and never once complained of it, and never once been ashamed of it, and I will not stand in my own house and permit her to be shamed for it now. He turned from the room then, and he looked only at her, as though the 400 and the candles and the whole starring county had simply gone away, and left the 2 of them alone in the music-room where none of it had ever begun. She is also, he said, lower now, but still, God help him for all of them to hear, the only person in my life these 11 years who has never once told me a lie. He drew a breath, and I watched my proud brother gather himself to do the hardest thing I have ever seen a man do, which was to tell the truth about himself, aloud in a crowded room at his own expense. I will tell you the whole of it, he said, since she has spent a winter teaching me what it costs to tell it any other way. I engaged this woman. I sought out a woman in difficulty, and I offered her money, and I asked her to counterfeit an affection she did not feel, so that I might be left in peace by the fortune hunters and the schemers who have hounded this house for a decade. That is the truth. That is the fraud my cousin has smelled out and dragged into this room, and he is welcome to it, and it is a poorer and a smaller thing than he supposes, because it failed. His hand tightened on hers until I saw her fingers white. It failed, Verity. Somewhere in this house this winter, I could not tell you the hour. I have tried, and I cannot find it. I stopped counterfeiting. I do not know when it stopped being a thing I paid for and became the only true thing left in my life. I would to God I had found the courage to tell you so in the quiet of the music-room, weeks ago, instead of being shamed into telling it now by a fool with a grievance before 400 strangers. But I am telling it now. He was not the Stone Duke any longer. He stood in the blaze of the reopened ballroom with a curate's daughter's hand crushed in his, and the 40 nearest candles found the wet shine standing in his eyes, and did not care in the least that a duke ought not to be seen to weep. Verity, he said, I do not want a winter. I never wanted a winter. I only did not know how to want anything more until you. I do not want an arrangement, and I do not want it dissolved in the spring, and I do not want a paragraph in the newspaper regretting that we did not suit. I want you to be my wife in truth, and no counterfeiting between us, none, not ever, so long as we both shall live. I know that I have no right to ask it of you, having begun the whole of it in a lie of my own devising. I am asking it anyway, because I have discovered, this winter, that I would rather be honestly refused by you, here, before the whole of this county, than falsely accepted by any other woman on the earth. I do not believe the county breathed. And Verity Sunderland stood there in the center of the floor with her silver mask fallen forgotten from her fingers and her true face bare to the light, and the greatest name in 3 counties held out, openly, to a penniless needlewoman. And I watched her understand at long last, the thing that had been true since the 2nd week of December, and that neither of their opposite honors would ever have let them say, that the man had never been performing in the music room either. That the honesty she had given him as a strange, dry, unlooked-for kindness, one lit corner in a dark house, had reached the frozen thing at the very center of him and thought it through, weeks ago, in the unwatched hours, without either of them daring to name it. "You bought my honesty for a winter, your grace," she said, and her voice broke, and then it steadied because she was who she was, "and I gave it to you, because it was the only thing I had left in the world to sell. So I will not stop being honest now, not now, when it is hardest, and when a lie would be so much easier to bear." She was weeping and smiling at once, the tears running plainly down her bare face for the whole county to see, and she did not trouble to hide them either. "The truth is that I have loved you since the afternoon in the music room when you listened to me speak of my father, and did not manage me, or measure me, or arrange your reply, but only listened, as though what I said were worth the hearing. The truth is that there is nothing in my whole life I have been more ashamed of than taking your money to lie to your friends, and nothing I have been prouder of than that I never once lied to you. And the truth is that I believed, all this winter, that you could not possibly love me, because you had paid for my company, and a man does not believe in the worth of a thing he has bought, and I would sooner have died than have you look at me, even for a single moment, as though I were a woman angling after your fortune." She lifted his hand, then his hand that held hers, and she pressed it, before the whole assembled county, against her own wet cheek. "Yes," she said, "in truth, and no counterfeiting ever so long as we both shall live." I will not attempt to describe the sound that great room made, because I have never been able to find the words for it, and I have given up trying. I will only tell you that the county of my birth, which had come that night in silk and masks to be scandalized, and which had been given instead the sight of 2 proud and honorable people telling each other the truth at the top of their voices in a blazing ballroom, that county did the thing that any assembly of ordinary human beings will do when it is shown, by accident, something truer than itself. It wept. And then first one voice and then 100, and then the whole 400 of it together, under the old dark beams and the 1,000 lights, it cheered. They were married that spring, from Ellersby, in the small gray church on the hill where our fathers lie, when the low meadows my brother was forever draining had gone green again, and the first of the Succession House roses were out. I stood up beside my brother, as I had stood beside him at every hard hour of his life, and I do not mind confessing that I made a poor show of it, being unable to see the ceremony clearly for most of its length. And Verity's sister Nell stood up beside her, pink-cheeked and rounder and well, after a whole winter of dry rooms and warm fires, and Mr. Hartley of Petergate fetched from York at my brother's expense. And I am persuaded, after a whole winter of being quietly and thoroughly loved by an entire great household that had made up its mind, on the night of the masquerade, to be devoted to both the Sunderland girls to the end of its days. Nell lived. I will tell you that plainly, because I know it is the thing you have been fearing. She lived. The lungs mended in the dry, warm rooms as Mr. Hartley had promised they might. And she grew up strong, and some years later married a very good and very ordinary young clergyman of her own choosing, her father's calling, come round again, but with money enough this time to make it comfortable. And she has children now, 3 of them, who call my brother Uncle Stone to his very face, which he permits, and which I have seen make the corner of his mouth move in a way that 11 years of my life I never thought to see again. And Alaric, I watched him all through that wedding morning, and I will end with what I saw, because it is the only ending worth the keeping, and I have kept it now for a very long time. I saw a man who had spent 11 years managing things instead of feeling them, draining meadows, mending byres, requiring an heir without hope, keeping faultless accounts of a life he had shut all the doors upon, standing in the door of the little gray church with the spring wind in the yews and his wife's hand in his. And I saw that all the doors he had closed, one after another, through the long winter of his grief, had been opened again, every one of them, the ballroom and the hopping and the whole warm interior of the man, and that they had not been forced, and they had not been charmed, and they had not been coaxed open by any practiced warmth or any beauty-studied gaze. They had been opened by the plain, unpurchasable, obstinate honesty of a poor woman who had refused, even when he paid her to do otherwise, even when telling him the truth threatened to ruin her before the whole world, to give him anything at all but the truth. He had built the entire scheme, that first snowbound night, expressly to make certain the love was false, so that it could never be taken from him. And he had been given instead, past all his deserving and quite against his own most careful designs, the one love in the whole of his life that was wholly, and dangerously and irrevocably true. He never afterward, in all the long years of their marriage, called that winter anything but the best bargain he ever made in his life, and he made a great many. He was a shrewd man of business to the end. And whenever he said it, over the port, or across the table to some young couple beginning their own lives, or quietly to me on the terrace on a summer evening, Verity would look up from whatever was in her hands, and she would tell him gravely that he had it exactly backward, as he generally did about anything that mattered, that she had come to Ellerslie that winter to sell him a lie and had been fairly paid for it. And that then, entirely without either of them intending it and long past any deserving of her own, she had been paid a second time, and in a currency neither of them had ever thought to name in any contract. She had been paid, she would say, in the truth. And then the two of them would look at one another, for just a moment, in exactly the way I had seen them look at one another in the music room that first December, when they had forgotten there was anyone in the world to perform for. And I, who was always there and who never counted, and who would not have had it any other way, I would get quietly up and find some errand at the far end of the terrace and leave the two of them to keep it.